All right, we're waiting just another minute for more members to log into the meeting.
Mary, did you, oh, never mind.
So we're just waiting on Sarah and Joanna. I will go ahead and get started with the remote meeting script, and hopefully they will join by the time I finished. So good morning, everyone. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and is being held by video conference. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. The public is encouraged to follow along and using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Present.
I don't know if Sarah Boyce has joined us. Vince, there's some people waiting to come in. Would you check on that? We'll come back to Sarah. Matt Fee.
Here.
Ian Goulding.
Yes.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
Joanna Rocha, I think, is just joining us. Joanna, if you're in, would you say hello?
Hello. Sorry.
Thank you. Good morning. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Courtney Rocha from the MVP program, the Municipal Vulnerability Program from the state of Massachusetts.
Here.
Thank you. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute yourself or you're on your phone or computer when you're not speaking. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. And if members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So turning to the first item on our agenda, it is a discussion with Courtney Rocha, the Southeast Regional Coordinator for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which is part of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So Courtney, that is quite a long introduction. Would you like to tell us more about action grant applications and how Nantucket's Coastal Resilience Plan recommendations may fit in that scope?
Hi, Mary and everyone. Thank you for having me today. Like she said, I am the regional coordinator for the MVP program, which stands for Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. And my job is to serve as liaison between the state government and municipalities to help them apply for action grants, formulate action grant ideas, and then if you are selected, provide technical and administrative support for grants. So what are these action grants? Since Nantucket has become MVP certified, which has gone through our prescribed planning process, it makes them eligible for action grants. And action grants can be anything that has to do with climate change and making Nantucket more resilient to the changes we anticipate to see due to the effects and hazards that will be exacerbated due to climate change. Does anyone have any MVP questions before I move forward?
Members, if you want to just raise your hand on the screen, or otherwise let me know. No, go ahead, Courtney. Thank you.
Great. And so I've worked with Chuck Larson on past MVP grants for guidance for homeowners on how to make their properties more adaptable. And then before each grant round, we release something called an expression of interest, which allows communities to submit their grant idea to us. We send it around for feedback and then give feedback to the town on their action grant idea, and then provide recommendations on how to make a stronger proposal. So Vince had submitted an expression of interest to our program about the downtown resiliency strategy from the Nantucket CRP. And what he proposed was more of the option of a flood wall and barrier system road raising around downtown Nantucket. And so then that gave us kind of an idea of how competitive or not we thought this project would be. Is everybody familiar with what I'm talking about here?
Okay, we're seeing nods, Courtney. So.
Oh, we're seeing nods. Okay, great. So that's a combination for the road raising and the flood barriers, and looking at the steamboat and wharf and some sort of maybe some nourishment. So overall, I think that this was determined with some the details aren't really flushed out here. So I would encourage you to go for a concept study and see if this is even doable. I mean, this is an idea, and once you start digging into what it means to raise a road, what does that mean on either side of the road when you're raising it? The slopes are going to have to be pretty gradual. What that means for homeowners when this infrastructure starts encroaching on their property, and is this infrastructure even going to work? Can it be built? What's the actual cost of this? And really digging into what it means to implement. So some concept designs and preliminary engineering designs, if you tend to apply to MVP, that would be something that you would look into. Make sure you get the right consultant who has experience in this area or knows the coastal dynamics of Nantucket. So another thing I would have to say is that MVP really focuses on, we have a heavy priority on environmental justice communities, climate vulnerable populations, and also nature-based solutions. So we tend not to fund just hard infrastructure. We really like a big portion of our application points has to do with green infrastructure, restoring nature, helping nature help itself. So if you're proposing hard gray infrastructure, we found that it's just not a feasible approach to adaptation most of the time for long-term adaptation. By building a wall, we've seen it in Situate, we've seen it all over the coast, that building walls is not a long-term solution, and it doesn't really work with what we're going to see in climate change. So implementing green solutions where you can, bioretention basins, other green infrastructure that you can implement along with this green infrastructure, along with this great infrastructure, would make this project more competitive. And then we really encourage outreach and engagement. This project is going to be huge. It's going to impact many people, many homes, the downtown area. So you're going to have a robust engagement strategy, but it seems like Nantucket is, this is not their first rodeo with engagement. People are involved, so demonstrating any past involvement and any future involvement with this project and how you go about engaging the public on this type of issue is going to be really important to this project. And then looking at this, the concept designs, there's a lot of homes in yellow that, or just, it says high or moderate coastal risk area structures. And there's a note here that says reduction of density and building scale adaptation in high and moderate coastal risk areas. I believe that is imperative to this area, reducing density, moving homes, adapting homes. MVP is really in the business of adaptation rather than mitigation. So that means we're trying to realize the effects of climate change and change the way we live, not trying to hold on to, this is the way we've always done it, this is how our downtown looks, we want to keep it looking like this. It's just not what our goals are. Our goals are to adapt to the future. So part of the engagement to make this project competitive would be, how do we reduce the infrastructure in this area? How do we talk with homeowners about what's going to happen to their property? How are they going to access their property? What it means for them to have utilities here? So there are a lot of things that need to be thought about this specific area, about how we continue to, or can we continue to function. So those are all really competitive MVP projects, but overall, I think this study is great. It has a lot of great points, but there needs to be more information about how to implement, what it's going to cost, the actual engineering involved to see this come to fruition, because this is sort of a broad strokes idea. And I think you need to get a little more information about how to actually, what it would mean to implement this and if it's even feasible.
Courtney, I have a question, if you don't mind me jumping in.
Nope.
So I have two questions, actually. The first, I'm curious whether or not site visits are included as part of the evaluation process. And I'd also like to know if Nantucket's status as a National Historic Landmark has any bearing on how the project might be considered.
So our projects are scored based on our 9 core principles, or the pillars. And
maybe Vince, you can put that up now.
Yeah, and you could put that up. And so our application, our RFR, is based off these 9 pillars. So the one that historic, it being a historic society, that would fall most under, I think, conducting community engagement. But we don't prioritize historic structures. It's basically we're looking to prioritize the largest social or geographic area possible with our funding.
And are site visits included? Is that a relative? Does that help you with your evaluation?
Me personally?
Well, in general.
Could site visits be included as part of the funding?
No, I meant as you, let's say you receive, I don't know, 50 applications this year.
Yeah.
Are they all judged entirely on the paperwork that's submitted? Or do you do any field evaluation, I guess is what
No, because we, the RFR will come out in mid-March. It's due 6 weeks later. And we've got over 200 EOIs, the expression of interest, so we can expect as that many, or if not more, applications. And then we're hoping to award funding as soon as June 30th. Mm-hmm. So everything, I might not even review this application. I hope I do. But everything that you need a reviewer to know should be in the paperwork.
Thank you.
And we work with CZM, and we work with a wide range of reviewers. So there's someone who's been to Nantucket that knows this area that will be reviewing this project.
Thank you. Do you have more that you want to tell us about these 9 criteria?
Vince, do you have a question, and then I can get to these?
Just to make it clear to everyone, what we're looking at as part of the letter of interest that I put in any potential application, Courtney used the word concept study. We'll be doing an engineering feasibility and public understanding study kind of thing to understand what is the best route, how will this work, who will be affected, is this the best route, is there an alternative route? So that will be the approximately 1-year study to get to a slightly higher understanding and basic engineering concept phase.
Thank you, Vince.
And I think, go ahead.
Fritz, yeah, do you have a comment?
Yes, if I may. Courtney, just so I understand, just in a general way, what's the level of funding? I mean, how much money are we talking about in funding these projects? Just in ballpark. Are we talking
For each specific project, or how much funding will we get in total?
How much? No, not in total. If we're looking for a grant, an action grant, what kind of funds might we expect? I mean, are we talking tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars? What's the ballpark? I'm sorry, Vince may know that.
Yeah,
So,
Vince,
no,
Courtney, if you want to go ahead, but I think Vince has more specifics.
Go ahead, Vince. I think you can answer that one.
So when we did the letter of interest, we had to provide an estimated budget, just a very, very rough outline number. And when Trevor and I were putting it together for what this kind of study might cost just for the downtown area, public engagement, just basic engineering, routing conversations, that kind of stuff, we put it in as a ballpark $300,000. 75% of that would be the funding, and 25% will be the town's match portion.
Thank you, Vince.
Yep, that's correct. So I think our average is around 100,000, but projects really range. We can give up to 3 million per community in total. But if you're asking for 2-3 million, the project has to be perfect. It has to hit 8 or 9 of these core principles that Vince has up on the screen. And I've gone over a lot of them already. If you could go to number 1. So number 1 is the community identified this in their planning process, which Nantucket did. So we can check that box, part of their planning document. The second one is using climate change data. So we really want to see that this project is driven by climate change. Nantucket can see X amount of sea level rise. We can expect to see this much precipitation, which will affect stormwater and our coastal waterfront. So we're proposing this solution because of this data. We don't want to just fund deferred. We don't fund deferred maintenance. We don't fund business as usual. So we really want to see that it's driven by climate change, which I think Nantucket can prove. Number 3, I already touched on nature-based solutions. And I touched on environmental justice and climate vulnerable populations and community engagement. So in this downtown area, but it does have one on the South Shore where next to the sewer beds, that could also be an MVP project about what to do with them long term. So just there's many projects within your CRP that are viable MVP projects. And I had mentioned to Vince, I think looking at bylaws on zoning, regulation, and wetlands to reduce development is going to be huge for areas like Nantucket to preserve the natural resources that you have so that they can accommodate future flooding and fresh water. Number 6 is achieving broad community benefits. like I said, we want the funding to have as large as social and geographic impact as possible. So we try not to fund neighborhood specific, but I would tie this project to, you know, the ferry terminal and how it services the entire island. I mean, that's really what makes your project regional and across the island rather than just specific downtown area. And the other two are regional solutions, which I touched on, and then innovative transferable approaches. So like I said, we don't fund business as usual. And if we do fund something, we want to make sure that we can hold it up and have other communities on the coast look at it and say, okay, I might want to try that too. So if you look at our RFR, which will be the same, very similar to the FY22 RFR, it will be structured in approximately this setup.
Great, thank you very much, Courtney. Are there questions or comments for Courtney or on this topic from members of the committee? Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. That's a good presentation. I'm thinking about it. Then, if we're making an application, we want to highlight the fact that we're increasing if we're increasing wetlands, if we're adding public benefit in what we're doing, and or if we're looking long term and we understand that that entire area will eventually be wetlands behind the, you know, sort of all the low-lying areas is going to have water rising, you know, all of Brant Point. We understand that, and sort of if that's the direction we're heading over the next, you know, multiple decades, is that something we highlight when we do the application?
Yes, definitely. We want to that we want you to know. Let me think how to phrase it. We want to understand that you're aware of the risks when you're taking these planning steps. And that's the largest difference between us and CZM is that we fund a lot of similar projects, except we encourage our planning horizon to be 2050, 2070, whereas CZM might fund something more like nourishment, which is more seasonal or not as long a planning horizon.
Other questions or comments? Jen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Courtney. This is really, really interesting. And, you know, it sounded like you were suggesting we do this as a feasibility study, and it sounds like that's what Vince is intending with the application, which we all agree is kind of where to start on a project of this size. Thinking about some of the things you mentioned, like the focus on natural solutions, you know, it's this one is looking for feasibility for something that's a little bit more of a structure determined that this part of Nantucket is the place that, you know, we need to protect things like, you know, our access to the whole, you know, for a whole island. Would it help with the feasibility study either that there's natural solutions incorporated into this, or to indicate like the other areas adjacent where we know we're going to have natural solutions? You know, it's like this area we're protecting is right in the downtown core. We know that there's some areas on Washington Street that will probably won't be within that protection area, but we will be doing other projects in the future. Like, you know, our whole CRP indicates other areas that we're definitely going to be doing a lot more natural solutions. I just wonder what's better for an application like this, if we add the feasibility of natural solutions to this particular area, or if we indicate our understanding of other areas where we're going to be doing natural solutions.
That's a great question. So my understanding is this application is for the downtown area specifically. So we're going to just be evaluating the downtown. So if you're saying, okay, we're going to do the study downtown, but over on this side of the island, we're going to be doing more green solutions, that probably won't count. But if you're looking at green solutions as part of the downtown, maybe near Children's Beach or something, like parts of it will have green solutions, that will help. Another thing to think about is if you're raising roads and building a flood wall, you could be trapping water on the other side as well. So you're going to have to evaluate a whole slew of drainage solutions, and a lot of those could have green components as well.
Great, thank you. Jen, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up. Thank you, Mary.
Yep.
I appreciate it. So there's, as you imagine, I mean, this is huge for Nantucket. So there's a lot of different pieces of work going on. And, you know, I know the town's already working on some storm drainage issues, thinking about water movement in this area. We also have, you know, through our preservation side of the town and the hazard piece, been looking at how we adapt, you know, the historic structures and work on that adaptation piece in downtown. I know you mentioned that that was an issue. So for an application like this, even if it's not part of this specific feasibility study, but it's being worked on in other ways through the town, I'm assuming we would want to present that in the application. So we're not asking for money to do a feasibility study of stormwater drainage, but the town is already working on that in this aspect. Would that all be pieces we'd want to include in this? What other work was going on in the downtown?
And I think I've had to answer this. We usually only evaluate what our funding is going towards. So we look at the project and what we're paying for, and does it meet our criteria? If there are other things happening in the town that would inform this, that would be helpful. Like you're doing a stormwater analysis and we found this. So now in this proposal, we're going to incorporate this nature-based solution because of something we found here that would be for feasible, but you don't necessarily get points for things that are happening in other parts of the town.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If there are none, thank you very much, Courtney. We really appreciate you joining us this morning. And, you know, I hopefully we'll have as good an application as we can get into you.
Yes, and I am able to talk with Vince or anyone until the RFR comes out on middle of March. So if you have some application points that you would like to send to me, I would be happy to look them over and provide any feedback. And I hope that once you look at this, you might be able to pivot to something that would benefit the town as well.
Great, thank you.
Gary, did you have a
Gary
question?
has a question? Yeah.
Yes, I do have a question. Courtney, just a question for you. And that is, are you familiar with the process that we went through to develop the coastal resiliency plan? Are you familiar with the last 2 years that we have spent educating the public, hiring the most sophisticated and most experienced consulting firm in the world that we could have to deal with some of these issues? So some of the things you said at the beginning about how you evaluate this to see whether the community has been involved in that. I just was curious to know how much of the background of the coastal resiliency planning you are familiar with that took place on Nantucket for the last 2 years. A lot of people, the whole community has been thinking about this. We've been having outreach meetings. We've been trying to get everyone that could possibly have any concern to have a voice to put their 2 cents or 4 cents in. And I'm just curious to know whether or not you folks, you personally or your organization, is familiar with the background, or is that something we have to include in our application process?
Gary, that's a great question. So me personally, I have been following along because I've been working with Nantucket on a side project for coastal resiliency through MVP. Past engagement is, you can include that showing that the town is on board with this solution is helpful to include. Letters of support that have been gathered for this type of project from homeowners is important. On the other hand, I can't say that I will read this application. So everything in the application has to assume that the person is brand new to this project. Like you're giving this application to a friend who lives in, Florida. So I can speak up when we review, but we have so many projects that I would encourage you to put as much information about how you arrived at this solution on the application. Secondly, I hope that the public engagement can continue. As you've narrowed down to this solution, I think the public engagement on what this solution means may be something very different than arriving at this solution. So implementation of this type of infrastructure is going to require even more public engagement. So people know how the landscape is changing and how it will affect their properties.
Thank you, Courtney. Can I ask if this is a fair statement? So the application that we put together for the project that we're proposing, what the MVP program does is evaluate the application's fit for the program. It doesn't so much evaluate the, let's say, the appropriateness of the project itself as it evaluates the fit for the program's funding goals. Is that a fair statement? And certainly there is some evaluation of the project itself, but if it failed to win funding, I guess is what I'm driving at, that would not necessarily mean a statement that the project was inappropriate for the community.
I understand what you're saying. We evaluate both. We evaluate, does it meet our core principles? Did it score highly on our application? And also, is this project viable? So we send it out to different agencies, DER, DCR, CZM. And if we hear this project would not fly, this project is not permittable, then we won't fund it, even if it meets our scoring criteria.
Okay.
And I think that our funding, yes, sorry, I don't need to elaborate anymore, I don't think.
Thank you. All right, last call for questions or comments. Again, Courtney, thank you for joining us this morning. It's been really helpful to have your perspective on this.
Great, I hope it was helpful. And Vince, please be in touch. Be happy to provide any assistance as necessary.
Super. Thanks, Courtney. We'll talk in a few days, I'm sure.
All right. Next item on our agenda is the beginning the discussion of the Coastal Resilience Plan recommendation 1-2 updates to the zoning bylaw to encourage resilient design and limit investment in areas of high coastal risk, and specifically with respect to our updated recommendation regarding sea level rise scenarios and best available data. So this is intended, again, just as a beginning of the discussion, not something that we're going to reach any conclusions today. I did invite the planning department, and they were not available today, but would be happy to come at a future time. So I anticipate that we'll have a more substantial discussion when they are available. But I know there have been some comments recently. Courtney just mentioned zoning. So we thought we should begin that conversation about what can zoning do for us? How would we work with that? What's appropriate to expect from that? So Vince, I don't know if you want to start off with thoughts, or Fritz, if you're from our planning board representative, have thoughts you want to start off with?
If it's of help to Mary, I can show that on screen where those two plans are in the CRP.
Okay.
So everyone can see this. To zoom in here, it's 1-2 and then 114 at the bottom, 114, which we discussed 2 weeks ago, about bringing in the Massachusetts coastal flood risk model. And then there's potential for very good tie-ins for doing the zoning as well at the same time, or having something running in parallel, I suppose is one of the nicest ways of putting it. I think that's about the best way I could put it. Having the parallels to have them run in tandem to not miss things. I know people like Fritz are curious about how to bring sea level rise interests into the planning sphere. Some of this will have to come from the state level, but we can at least certainly discuss, like we did 2 weeks ago, about how to bring this in from the town level for town local bylaws, planning bylaws, potentially wetland protection information. Fritz might want to add quite a bit to that.
Thank you, Vince and Mary. I personally am not familiar with specific techniques or potential bylaws that we might want to consider. I don't know how much background the planning department has specifically on these types of bylaws. I presume this has been done somewhere else before, but perhaps not to a great extent. So it would be interesting to know how much we are pioneering in this area as background. I know at one point in one of the past meetings, I think there was a suggestion that Matt and I might meet with the consultants, or at least I shouldn't say meet with, speak with the consultants about what ideas or background they have. But at this point, there really has not been any engagement or discussion at the planning board on coastal resiliency. And I think we just need to figure out how to get started and what our expectations should be.
Thank you, Fritz. That's kind of why I put it on the agenda today, just to begin thinking about those questions. Sarah, you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I am really interested to hear what Fritz had to say, because I was feeling sort of like a novice of not really knowing a lot about our zoning bylaws and what's possible. And so to hear too that even the people that I consider like most knowledgeable don't have like a playbook for how this would work, and what even the things that we're going to be talking about and considering. So I think it would be really useful. I know it would be for me, and maybe it's just homework on the outside before coming to a meeting, but seeing, as Fritz said, what other communities have done. You know, in the past 2 years of meeting, we've had experts from other communities, but I think we're in a different stage now where we can actually start to really take on some of that information. So I'm thinking about when we talked with people from Hawaii, and we talked about, I don't know if zoning is the right area that we were discussing, but you know, there was those discussions of limiting development in high risk areas. There were discussions about limiting like the types of development or the types of use, and making more restrictions in those areas. I think it's hard. I know I'm finding it hard to have a discussion when I don't really have enough information to even bring ideas to the table. So to Fritz's point, knowing how much we're pioneering some of this, examples from other communities would be great, or proposals of what might be possible to really evaluate, I think would be helpful.
Thank you, Sarah. That was part of my reason for inviting the planning department, was to let us know what opportunities we have through zoning, give us some a direction, where to look. And I agree, we would love to have examples from other communities. So if anybody is aware of any, please, let Vince and I know so we can take a look. Fritz, you had a follow-up comment, and then I'll get to Joanna.
Yes, I just want to respond a little bit to Sarah. I mean, just as a lawyer, who happens to be involved in zoning, not a zoning lawyer. The issues that come up when you're limiting people's property rights is to what extent, the biggest issue I think we will face is whether certain techniques amount to a taking of property. And taking of property, obviously you're familiar with, involves compensation. Do people have certain grandfathered rights? So if we're all of a sudden going to say, and one of the techniques might be, like have been used in other circumstances, so-called zoning overlay districts, where you sort of just draw a map and put a checked area around certain areas and say these are flood-prone areas, are going to be flood-prone areas, and therefore we don't want anybody building there after such and such a date. It is going to be a big question, I think. And I think you're going to, not that I think there are solutions. I'm just saying you may very well hear people say, oh, we can't do that because of that particular issue. That's why I think it's important that we find out what other communities have done and have they done it successfully. I'm sure there's a lot of research and case law, and I shouldn't say a lot of case law, some case law in terms of what kinds of techniques are legal or result in having to provide compensation to the owners versus otherwise. Thank you.
And I'll just add, keep in mind, zoning is not the only tool in the toolbox. There are other forms of regulation that may accomplish the goals better than zoning does. So just because we might consider zoning, it doesn't mean it's the only thing we can consider. Joanna, comments?
Yes, hi, thank you, Mary. I'm just trying to turn the camera on. Well, hi. I have a couple of comments. I think the first thing is I think it's really difficult to have this conversation without the planning department present, because we don't really have a sense of what they're thinking about. This is very complicated, right? And especially having sat through and voted on many changes to the zoning laws over these many years without having them directly involved in what they think is the potential and having a plan from them on their reaction to this, it's hard for us even to imagine what we could start to even discuss that could impact the zoning rules, right? So I think it's really difficult to do that. The second thing is, especially after listening to the presentation by Courtney, I think that we really need to try to help the town understand that they need to hire someone who is a grant writer, who understands all of this and can get involved in the weeds. This week, we are not qualified to do this. There are many of us on this board who have done grants and administered grants and know about that, but this is a whole other game and the stakes are so high. If we hire a professional grant writer, out of DC or out of Boston who understands this, we increase the likelihood of us getting funds for this so dramatically that it seems our better efforts as a committee would be to put whatever leverage we can on the select board or the town to try to make this happen as soon as possible, right? It's just my observations from listening about these two particular things. I think that, Gary, I agreed with you because I also felt in the beginning of that conversation that she hadn't really understood what we had just spent all this time doing and didn't really understand the plan. And so that is a little bit discouraging, right? So thank you.
So Joanna, just as a reminder, we do have Arcadis helping us with this grant application. So it's definitely not something that the committee is directly involved in either writing the grant or supervising the grant. That's Vince's job.
I appreciate that. I just think that we, this is not just a Nantucket issue, right? This is a countrywide issue, this climate change, right? And there's going to be a lot of towns and communities who are on the water who are going to be scrambling to get these federal dollars. And we are ahead of some of these communities in some ways. And we need to leverage that advantage as soon as we possibly can.
Matt, and we'll get to members of the public after members of the committee have finished speaking.
I think we can't assume that the planning department is any more informed than we are. I think that this is a beginning process, and and it's a complete change. I look at this sort of simplistically, people talk about retreat, but before you retreat, we have to stop going forward. And so that's what we're doing. How do we stop going forward? How do we stop making the situation worse? And I like Fritz's idea of overlays we should be considering overlays in all of the at-risk areas so that we aren't making those areas worse and making it harder to deal with in the future. And I think that will not be popular in some cases. Some of these issues have come up with the select board when the town's talking about sewering Mattocket. They're like, well, why are we sewering Mattocket and make it worse when we know what's going to happen in Mattocket? So those conversations are already sort of percolating in the community. People are starting to get it, which I think is a positive, that we're saying, okay, what's the right way to handle this? I think that we can do some of it without zoning, but I think zoning is going to have a very important aspect, because we can't do this with the, oh, please try not to do this. There's going to have to be a sort of a best practices that are sort of, so that we all should be following in these areas in the future, that I think, that you really only get through zoning. So those are mine for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Jen?
Thank you, Mary. This is a really interesting discussion. I'm wondering if it seems like we've identified the planning board as one place that we want to look at changing regulations to help. And I just wonder if the best thing is to go to the planning board and say, what is going to be most helpful? Because it seems like there's an information gap here. And if we're going to be facilitating how, this process starts to happen, maybe our role is to figure out how to bring those examples, bring information, bring options, and then help facilitate that discussion as to, the planning board probably has a better understanding of what they're able to do under their purview. Maybe we have the resources to kind of bring outside options that haven't been thought of yet here. And I know, and I think Sarah kind of alluded to this point that, we've kind of been an information gathering source in the past, bringing presentations and things here. And maybe that's kind of what we could do at this issue, is figure out how we can bring people to our meetings and then find a way to invite the planning board so that it is more of a connection conversation kind of option.
Right. Vince, you have a quick comment on that, and then we'll go to Ian.
Very quick. I can't write it in stone yet, but fingers crossed, hoping to have the planning, someone from the planning department from Plus speak at a future meeting. This is something that Mary has already pursued, and they have quite a lot on their plate at the moment. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, if it works out, March 22nd, I've no idea if that'll work or not, but it's in progress. But what we need now at this point, kind of like what Matt was basically saying, we need to understand where the committee stands, where the committee sees as priorities for zoning, or what kind of stuff. Matt suggests overlay maps. That's the kind of thing that we need to know at this point, and where the committee stands on those. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Vince. Ian?
Thank you, Mary. This is through you to Vince, and slightly tangential. So Vince, could you put up the strategy ID graph again that you had up? And thank you. And because what caught my attention was the 1.3 update to wetland ordinance and regulations. And then the date is given, I believe, as 2025. And I I mean, we've been trying to update them for years and we're hoping to come to terms with it. And I wondered if that had any particular significance or. And would you be kind enough to send me a copy of this?
The CRP?
This is a page in the CRP.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll send you a link for it right now. Just give me a second.
Thank you.
So
I guess
to
that
achieve-
hadn't caught my attention beforehand, so.
It's at the very end.
Caught out here.
So the dates that are attached to these, Ian, if that's what you're curious about,
Yeah.
some of them are staggered for just getting done by a certain date. These are suggested dates. If it becomes a principle for this committee to get it done sooner, so be it. Just don't overload me with all 40 projects at once, please.
No, I was just curious. It's something that we're dealing with in Concom, and so I wondered if there was any ulterior message there. So thank
No.
you.
Sarah and then Gary.
Thank you, Mary. I just wanted to, to follow up on something that Vince just said about, I think it's wonderful that if we're inviting people from the planning board to come and talk with us. But, jumping off on what Jen just said about, we have been in this listening mode for a while. And so I think, we know that we need to move forward and be constructive with both our time and our expertise and moving forward. We want to move forward with the plan and make things happen. So I think other than just having that they're coming on the agenda, what is our objective? So really specifically, what are we asking of them? Or are they getting information from us? So I think I don't have that answer right now, but when Vince, you just were saying what our priorities are, what do we want? And, saying overlays, I can't really evaluate something unless I know what we're more specifically talking about. We know there's overlays of sea level rise and erosion and vulnerability, and there's lots of different areas. We know from the CRP, there's overlays on, specifically vulnerable structures, but I think maybe we need to take even a step back. I hate to take a step back, but think critically about what we can do as an advisory committee to advise maybe the planning board or, or obviously the select board. But I think if we're going to continue to have people from different committees come, which we need to, because we all kind of need to be on the same page, I think we need to have a really specific structure of what we're looking for. And I don't know what that is just yet, but it's hard as a committee member to evaluate something when I'm not totally sure what direction we're taking things in.
So just to answer that, Sarah, my invitation to the planning department was for them to tell us, to answer questions like, well, what can we accomplish with zoning? How do we use zoning to get to where we want to be? What can't zoning do for us? So it is to address that groundwork level of question, where do we go? Where do we start? And, I think it's important that we also, as you said, are in communication with various departments that are affected by or can contribute to the goals that we have. This is going to be a long conversation. This is not something that we're going to wrap up in a meeting or two and have something prepared for the next town meeting. Because ultimately any zoning proposal is going to go through town meeting. And that means that we need to do education. We need to gauge what the public will support. It's definitely a long and involved process, and we will have a part in it, but I don't think that as an advisory committee, we will be doing all the work ourselves. So Vince, and then we'll go to Gary and then Fritz.
Yep, just a really minor one. Sarah used an interesting word and it just resonated with me, evaluate. I don't know that necessarily this committee is going to evaluate any new sea level rise ordinance or zoning bylaw ordinance or anything like that. What I think we need at this point is to get direction, get the policy right for what this committee wants, and then how that committee level policy gets incorporated into any new guidelines or whatever it might happen to be after that. So the reason why it resonated with me is Sarah has a very, very, very strong science background, and it's been difficult for me to move from evaluating to developing, from evaluating policy to developing the next one. So I think that might be one of the things that this committee needs to understand.
Thank you, Vince. Gary?
Yeah, this is really a question. It's not an opinion. As we start to talk about changing rules, regulations, zoning or whatever, I'm just curious to know, and I'm not sure I do know, what is the basis for the existing rules and regulations that exist today? I know that when I make comments, or if somebody appears before the planning board and somebody challenges what they do, they say they're operating within the existing regulations. The same thing for the Conservation Commission. There were rules that I hear sometimes about 50 feet from a wetland or 100 feet from a whatever. Where do those rules come from? Is that something that we have put in? Are they state rules? Where do those rules come from? That there are existing rules in effect today. I know the last time I complained at one of the meetings, planning board, about somebody putting a pool in a flood zone, they said, oh, it fits within the existing regulations. So my question is, what is the basis of those regulations to see whether or not we have the ability to change them if we want to?
So Fritz may be able to answer that.
A little bit, because I was obviously at the meeting that Gary's talking about. And forgive me, because all of a sudden something popped up on my screen that's taken over my screen. So I can hear you. I don't see anybody, and I'm afraid if I start hitting buttons, I'm just going to disconnect myself. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so
We hear you fine.
okay, fine. So the very answer to the specific question, when it was referred to the building within existing regulations, that simply meant existing FEMA standards. So that's a state regulation that basically says that they have to build a certain height above to use a very unprofessional word, flood level, but based on current FEMA data. And that's what the state law basically allows right now, and that's all they're required to do. And they're not required to take into account anticipated sea level rise, as we have recommended that we would like people to do. Does that answer the question, Gary?
Gary, I would add that the broader answer is these regulations come from 400 years of federal, state, local, and even perhaps British law that have all been built on to get us where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up a little bit, I mean, it's basically two things. It's the state building code, and which is totally governed by the state, and with some modifications by the town, and zoning bylaws. And the zoning bylaws are basically enabled by state law, and Massachusetts general laws say communities may do this and may do that. And then we adopt zoning bylaws to the degree to which we want to do what they say we can do. We can't do something that's outside the parameter of what the state permits, but we're not obliged to adopt everything. So for instance, just to give you an example, secondary and tertiary dwellings, those are something that are permitted by the state zoning bylaw, or I shouldn't say bylaw, state zoning law, but was adopted by the town back in 2015, 2016 at annual town meeting. Those were cases of where we would not have had to adopt those, but we were permitted to, and the voters did. So that's kind of how it develops. It all kind of comes from Massachusetts general law in the first instance.
And
Gary, do you have a follow-up? Yeah.
yes, can a community decide to put in stricter regulations than that which the state has imposed?
I think the answer to that, it would be, depends upon what type of, what you're specifically we're talking about.
Some additional rules might be prohibited, so we can't just decide what we want to do. Ian, it looks like you have a comment directly to this topic. Do you wanna-
Well, I do. So I dug out my regulations here, which weren't much help. And then Googled it. Apparently Massachusetts was the first national wetland regulations in the early 60s. Ours date back to at least February the 25th, 1988. And then were revised in 2008. And providing the state attorney general signs off on it and the Conservation Commission, we do have the ability to have stricter regulations than the state regulations. And in fact, we do in some instances. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Ian. It's good information.
Good.
Gary, did you have anything further?
Oh, that was promising comment from Ian. If we can do that with the Conservation Commission, maybe we can do that with the zoning as well. Maybe the town has the power to start imposing some additional restrictions faced with what we're going to be dealing with in the next 10, 20, and 30 years.
Yeah, I think it'll be town meeting rather than the town administration, but it'll be interesting. So we'll take Jen's comment, and that'll be the last, I hope, committee member comment. We'll take one comment from the public. Rick Atherton has had his hand up for quite some time, and then we'll move on to the next topic, if that's all right with everyone. Jen?
Thank you, Mary. And yeah, just backing up what Ian said, I think planning is one route we can think about this, but there also is the wetland regulations route, because it does kind of review what happens near our coastal areas. And there's federal regulations, state regulations, and then our local regulations, which really comes down to the Concom working on adapting that local bylaw and then getting it approved. And we can be stricter than the state regulations in a lot of ways, which is, I think, useful information. My original hand up comment, though, Mary, was to ask that when we do have the planning board members come speak to us, I think it's great for us to be able to ask them questions about what's possible, under our understanding of planning regulations. But I also think it would be really great if we asked them what they need from us and how we can help. And that kind of, again, goes back to the idea that, Sarah said, let's be specific about what we're trying to get out of these informational sessions. And we want to hear what they think is possible, but also we want them to be open to things that haven't been possible before. So if there's information that we can gather, what's happened in other places, things to look forward to, we're looking at change, and we're looking at kind of moving that normal bar around a little bit to help come to a solution here. So it'd be great if that could be one of the objectives they know we're looking for when they come in to talk to us.
Absolutely. And again, I'll encourage members, do a little digging on your own, or if you're affiliated with any organizations that might have information about how other communities are using zoning to help with coastal resilience, the more examples that we have, the better. So thank you for that. Rick Atherton, please go ahead, and thank you for waiting.
Mary, yeah, thank you. I just thought it might be helpful for the committee to be reminded that in terms of our planning board and town meeting, at least having some initial discussions about ways zoning can impact the effects of sea level rise. I think it was 2015, and a citizen article was presented, Coastal Liability Waiver. And it was a zoning article. It was drafted by town council, presumably legal. A lot of the ideas came from Kauai in Hawaii and other states at that time. I'm sure since then there have been many more communities that have moved to adopt the concept of people building in an erosion-prone area to waive liability to the community. In other words, the community shouldn't be responsible. Individuals should be responsible for what they wish to do. The planning board did not feel that zoning was necessarily the right venue for that. That's their option and purview. And the article was reintroduced in, I think it was 2019, and received the same response from the planning board. In each of those cases, the planning board indicated we understand the issue and there may be some study we could undertake, and come back with some ideas. I'm not sure they've had time to do that since then. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because it's not as if the town meeting has not had at least one article presented to it specifically dealing with the impacts of coastal erosion. So thank you, Mary, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Rick. And for clarity, I think you were the sponsor of that article. Is that correct?
I was indeed in both cases. I did the homework myself, and it was clearly based on information coming from other parts of our United States where such issues have been faced. And I'm sure Arcadis can bring those to your attention. They're fairly common and easy to find.
But if you have specific examples, please feel free to forward them to Vince too. All right, moving on to the next topic on our agenda. So again, beginning a discussion of the future composition, mission, and purpose for the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, and what we would want to recommend to the Select Board for action to extend the term of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee beyond the current expiration of June 30th, 2022. So the assumption being that we would want to continue, are there any changes that we should contemplate? Again, this is just beginning the discussion. This is something we will probably have several conversations about in order to produce a recommendation or decide not to produce a recommendation. The original mission of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is posted on the committee's page on the town's website. It does include advising on implementation of the Coastal Resilience Plan. So it was never the intent at the beginning that the committee would end its involvement once the Coastal Resilience Plan was adopted. But the question is, should we have a different focus as we move from creation to implementation? Do we need additional resources on the committee? Do we need different member seats? Are there any members of the committee that are not interested in continuing? Please send a note to Vince if that's the case. But I certainly hope that we all are still committed to the cause here. So if anyone has any thoughts about the future purpose or composition of the committee, we'd love to get that conversation started. See everybody looking away from the camera, so don't pick on me first. Is kind of the vibe that I'm getting. Gary, would you go ahead? Thank you for volunteering.
To me, the most important benefit of, say, a continuation of the committee, although I assume our compensation will be increased greatly if we are continuing, but to me, the benefit is that we'll be able to continue to provide some focus in the community on the issues that we want the public to be dealing with. There are so many other important issues being debated today and considered today that if this committee did not exist anymore, then it's likely that there will be less emphasis on completion of all of the projects that are listed on that coastal resiliency plan that to take place in the future. So if we're not around to kind of ask people to come to meetings and ask the Select Board for quarterly updates on actions taken, then who's going to do that? So that's my thought.
Thank you, Gary. Other thoughts from committee members? Do people in general think that we should, provide a letter to the Select Board stating at the minimum that we want to continue? Ian?
Well, yes, Mary. I mean, at the very least, where the eyes and ears of the Select Board removed, and I absolutely agree with Gary's point. So I think it's an advantage to the town to have an informed opinion and part of the network of discussing issues that affect the town with a broader audience. So thank you.
Matt, did you want to offer a comment from the Select Board perspective?
Yeah, I just gave a thumbs up. I think we should ask, send it and say we'd like to remain involved. It could easily stall if we don't. So I think it's important that we, keep doing this.
And so currently our terms all expire concurrently. Should we request a more permanent existence, and should we think about staggered terms? Matt, do you have any advice on that?
I think all that sounds great. I think that would be, yeah, and we could put that in the letter.
Jen?
Thanks, Mary. I agree with everything that's been said, and I just think it might be smart if we review our charge, which I hadn't done in a while, which is why I was looking at my other screen. But maybe at the next meeting, in whatever letter we send, if there's things that we need to add to that or take away from it, that might be the right time to do it. I just haven't gone through our specific charge in a while to make sure it holds up to what we're doing now.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts? All right, so again, this was just the beginning. I will definitely take Jen's suggestion and bring up a review of our charge at an upcoming meeting, and we can see if we've accomplished anything that needs to be crossed off, or if we want to add anything that would change our scope. We do have public comment on the agenda today. Are there any members of the public that have a comment at this time? Just go ahead and unmute yourselves and let us know that you are looking for a comment. And if I'm not seeing any, we can move on to approval of the minutes. So we have the minutes of the last two meetings. We had held off approval of the January 25th meeting because of the extensive rewrite that I did on the minutes. Again, just as a reminder, my purpose was to make sure that all of the details that Chuck presented were recorded together in the minutes. Hopefully people have had a chance to review this. And Vince, stop me if I'm wrong, but I think what we were going to do was add a note to the minutes saying that one of the captions on the slides had been in error and needed to be corrected. And the original slide presentation would go with the January 25th minutes. Then on the February 8th minutes, we would have the updated presentation attached because there were other changes made to it, just with the note that it was updated.
Correct.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the minutes from January 25th? If there are none, we can take a motion to approve them as amended.
Move
So
approval?
I'll take that as Matt moving approval and Gary seconding, if we can. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
I'm
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carper,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
Joanna Roche. Joanna, are you still there?
she put a note in the chat that she had to jump
Okay.
off.
Thank you. And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. Sorry, I missed that. That was 11:12 for the minutes. Joanna had to leave. So the minutes of January 25th are approved. Fitz, if you can share the minutes from February 8th. Did anyone have any comments or revisions to these minutes?
Mary?
Yeah, Vince?
Thank you, Mary. I have to make two amendments. I have to add the meeting recording and I have to add the note about the updated presentation.
Okay. So with those amendments, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
There's the updated presentation.
So moved.
Thank you, Gary. And a second.
Second.
Thank you, Matt. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
I'm
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Joanna is no longer in the meeting. Okay, so new business committee and natural resources department reports. We did, I'm sure, all see the extensive news coverage of the release from NOAA and NASA of their sea level rise technical report. That will be definitely a subject of a future meeting, but I did want to make sure that people had a chance to review the actual report before we brought it up for discussion. I think that came out just last week. So that's just the announcement of the availability of the report, and there is a link in the agenda for anybody looking for that report. Vince? You're going with Baxter Road?
Beg your pardon, Baxter Road? Yes. So the biggest update I have for Baxter Road is that last Thursday, the Arcadis, along with myself and some senior town admin and people from the select board, attended a CONCOM workshop to discuss how to get the existing project back into compliance. We had a compliance plan and we had an operation and maintenance manual. They were the two main parts of it. We tried to get, we got quite nice information and quite nice feedback from the Conservation Commission. They did not vote and won't vote until we make some more minor amendments to the compliance plan and the operation and maintenance manual. We have to just now just make minor adjustments and submit it at some point for them to make their decision on. I feel like I frequently put Ian on the spot. I don't mean to put Ian on the spot, but he is the CONCOM rep if he wants to have a second to say how the meeting went.
Ian, any comment?
I couldn't have put it better or more succinctly than Vince. So I rest our mutual case.
Thank you, Ian. Anything on the road relocation at Baxter Road?
No, it's just one of those projects that's continuing on. It's a much more involved and much more long engaged process to get a road relocation plan in place. It's just moving along. The most recent parts of the discussion are to try and get agreement with local property owners so we could just simply go walk the areas. That's in progress. It's not complete and far from it.
Okay, thank you, Vince.
Mary, Matt has his hand up.
Yeah, and
Thank you,
Mary, I'll make a quick comment. I think the town is working diligently on this. They're speaking to a lot of the homeowners already about sort of putting some of this in place, sort of the principles that we've talked about, looking at this long term, and those types of things are all on the table. It's and as Vince said, I don't like the idea that it's complicated, but I will say it is, or it's hard to understand. It's not hard to understand, but there's a lot of facets to this, and so it's underway, and it's it's not as simple as how do I say it? Moving a road with mass law is not as simple as asking people to move the road, or saying, oh, we're going to move the road. There's a lot of aspects to this, and and so it's so far it's been a cooperative effort, and everyone has their concerns, and the town has their concerns, and it's going to take a while to sort through them.
Thank you, Matt. Deanne Atherton has her hand up. Deanne, I do want to preface your remarks by saying that these are just updates to the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee on these projects. These are not projects that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is participating in directly. So if you have a comment of just about the update, please go ahead, but just know that we are not the appropriate venue to comment on the project itself.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, I do understand that.
Thank you.
My question is just a public information question for Vince related to his report. And that is that both of these Baxter Road related projects that are underway, we understand are very time intensive. That's what the town manager said last week at the workshop meeting. I think many of us are curious to know, Vince, if you just had to make a guesstimate, what percentage of your time is being spent on these two projects?
Vince, if you want to answer that.
I don't know. Quite simply, this is by far from the only project I work on. I'll tell you that in the last couple of weeks, even though we've been preparing for this workshop, I've put more time into grant preparations and grant discussions than I have into Baxter Road. I haven't parsed it out to the hour or anything like that. I kind of, for the NOI part of it and getting that part engaged, I'm working with consultants on it. They are doing most of it, of the kind of heavy lifting part as part of their contract. I'm administering that part of the contract. For the road relocation, there's 3 of us involved. It's not just me. And That is the more slowly developing project, so it still has time to take off. It hasn't become an intensive one for me yet in the road relocation. Yeah, I'm not going to put numbers to it, but I've certainly spent more time on other items.
Matt Fee?
Thank you.
I think what it sort of has shown me is it's going to be that what Vince is doing here is also what's going to have to be done in Mattocket and other areas. And we need, and we're learning what staffing and what requirements and how to do this. It's some of this is a sort of work in progress, but I think, we're gaining a lot of valuable information for how we're going to have to address this in all other areas of the island. When we have a neighborhood and we have to address it, whether that be Mattocket or Grant Point or et cetera, we're going to have a bit of a, we've got a lot more information, a lot more knowledge now, and we'll have a lot more knowledge a year from now than we do, than we had before we started. So I think it's we're moving a positive direction.
Thank you, Matt. And Vince, speaking of other projects you're working on, you have a Shoreline change monitoring program update as well.
Sure thing. Just as I'm getting this ready to go on screen, I realized when myself and Mary were discussing putting this together, I'm just doing the wrong thing, one moment, that I never expressed what a lot of this is actually about. We know that in the CRP, there it is finally, there's a lot of recommendations. One of the recommendations is for Shoreline Change Monitoring Program. Can everyone see this as a presentation now, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to give an overview that this is actually part of recommendation 1.4. I've never articulated that before, quite simply. Apologize for that, but this is something that's coming straight from the CRP. We began this kind of as a phase 1 project in December, and we've been expanding the locations ever since. Sewer Beds and Nonanton were the first places. Tom Nevers came shortly after that. We added on the airport and a location in Mattocket quite recently, but these are all supplemented and following the same principles that we've been doing at Baxter Road for quite a number of years. I have to say, all of the locations except Baxter Road are on public property or with the permission of the property owners. The one on Baxter Road that has been around since 2018, I think, has a combination of private property and public access paths. That is somewhat more difficult information to publish, and it was in the report last summer that came out on the Baxter Road Engineering Feasibility Assessment, and getting that together for that was a trick. Updates on that are a constant request from the public, and I'm trying to see if I can find a way of making that private property information public, but that is an extremely tricky thing. I can absolutely make the information from any other location public as anyone requests. So the phase 1 is just quite literally stakes in the ground and pulling measuring tape. In the CRP recommendation, it says to use GPS equipment. That's something we have to work up to, and because of the way the departments work, I'm justifying the project first and collecting what base information I can so that we can work our way up to purchasing engineering level GPS equipment. And it will take us from the 1 foot measurement increments that we do now down to 1/10 of an inch or finer, depending on the quality of the equipment we can afford. So just, I'm going to move from west to east, more or less. Mattocket first, we just set up one at the just near the intersection of Mattocket Road. We just started that on the 2nd of the month. No, we didn't. We started it after the last meeting. This is the estimated road edge when we did the initial survey on the 2nd of February. At the sewer beds, you've already seen information presented on this one. There's 3 locations at the sewer beds where we're taking information at the moment. At Nonanton, we had to get permission from the land bank to put this station in here on land bank property. We had to move it away from the road, from the access path here a little bit into dune grass and kind of make sure that vandals wouldn't pull up stakes or the like. So it's away from the road edge, but it's intended to gather information for this corner here that is in an erosion zone as mentioned in the CRP. We set up 3 locations at the airport along the fence line that's closest to the shoreline. And because of the separation and the distance from the bank edge to the shoreline, sorry, to the fence, I beg your pardon, we had to come up with smaller intervals, quite frankly. So the one in the middle at 2 is right on the fence line at 18 feet, and then 18 feet to the bank edge is not much at all. At position 1, we were able to get the proper 20 feet, but we couldn't get the same proper 20 feet at position 3 because of it would put it right in the middle of a walking trail, and that's just not safe. Couldn't do that. Tom Nevers, we initially came up with 6 locations to understand it in relation to the existing tarmac structure here, but we also added in 2 more locations to understand the full width of the property at Tom Nevers. And then everyone knows or may have seen this in the previous report, there's the 9 locations on Baxter Road. In recent, I can stop sharing now. In recent setup, we've not noticed much in the way of erosion. By far and away, still the worst location for erosion is the sewer beds, and it's the one we're collecting. Well, we visit every one of these monthly, more or less, or after a storm as needed, or pre-storm as needed. But the information we're getting shows that the sewer beds is the one that's losing the most ground at the moment. I imagine seasonally that'll change. And other locations might pick up and lose, might lose ground episodically, as we're already seeing here. The one at Madicott Road is right next to the corner of Madicott and Ames. That's one that we're trying to understand more about as well, because that's a tricky spot and it's in a very, very high erosion zone. And trying to get that one established was obviously a priority and had been requested by members of the public in the past. At past meetings. It's now in place, and trying to see the rate of change there will be interesting.
Thank you, Vince. Vince, did you want to add anything about the grant conversation that we had with Trevor at this point? Or do we want to save that for a topic at a future meeting?
No, I can just give a very, very brief overview.
Okay.
So yesterday, Mary and Trevor and I had a very brief conversation about the grant applications and how that might progress. Still, obviously, working on the MVP one. We've also come across another one from CZM. There's going to be, they're not going to do a letter of interest, they're going to do a workshop, try and outline how their grant system is going to work. It is another potential source that might be a good fit for the downtown flood relief barrier, still investigating it and still trying to understand the rules of that granting system. It's just another possibility.
And Vince, you had mentioned whether some Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee members should also attend that workshop.
So that workshop is happening March 3rd. I think it's about an hour and a half. It would be great to see some, I get the impression that because they're not doing a letter of interest, attendance will be taken and marks duly allocated for attendance. So it would be great to see good representation from Nantucket. I'm obviously going to be there, and I would hope other staff will be there, but I would invite any CRAC members that wish to attend to also join that meeting. It should be about an hour and a half. I think it's from 9:30 to 11 or something on the 3rd. I will confirm the date in an email to all CRAC members. And because it's just a workshop and it'll just be an information session, I don't think there's any issues with quorum.
Okay, I am planning to attend, but if any other members are, please let Vince know. Other updates from other committee members? Not seeing any. Discussion of updating meeting dates and topics. So our committee would normally meet on Tuesday, March 8th. However, there is a workshop scheduled, which technically the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee has one person attending, representing the committee, and that is me as the chair. However, as it turns out, many of you represent other committees on this board, and will be representing those boards at that workshop. And so we will be posting a meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee because we will have a quorum of members there. I think Joanna Roach was selected by the Finance Committee to represent them. She doesn't represent the Finance Committee on this board, but she is a member of this committee. Matt, as a member of the Select Board, is attending. So we have that sort of thing. So just a reminder to everyone who is attending that you're there representing whichever board or committee chose you to attend on their behalf. And technically speaking, I am the only person there representing the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. But we will be posting that meeting notice. We will not have all of our members in attendance. I know some have conflicts with that date anyway. So we will not be having a regularly scheduled Tuesday, March 8th, 10 a.m. meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee because our members will be committed to the workshop in other capacities, which means that our next meeting would be Tuesday, March 22nd. Vince, I hope I got all those details correct. All right, good, thumbs up for that. The talk in the town has been to investigate hybrid meetings, starting with regulatory boards for the most part. So going back to some in-person and some remote presence. I'm anticipating that we will be allowed to continue meeting remotely in April, but that is not certain. It requires the legislature to extend that permission, first of all, and then the town to continue that permission for us as well. But I think that is indicated. Hopefully that will be clear sooner rather than later. But I do want to make sure that members of the committee are interested in continuing to meet remotely or interested in meeting live in person. I'm not sure how the town is going to be working with the in-person meeting space. They're discussing different enhancements to recording equipment and microphones. So this all remains to be seen, but definitely wanted to give the members of the committee an opportunity to weigh in with their preference. Any thoughts? Jen?
Thank you, Mary. I'm open to meeting either way. I just know that we have some members that aren't always on island, Gary. It would be great if, I'm just wondering if, I know in the past, or for when I remember being on Concom, was that you could call in for only, and this was only on the phone, for a certain number of meetings. It was like, there was a certain number that you could only call in for, but you also couldn't vote when you called in. I'm just wondering if there's going to be some adaptation so that there are certain members that, because it's really valuable to have, you know, Gary's input, you know, or if there was another, you know, member of the non-voting taxpayers that, you know, became one of our representatives. It's just important, I think, to have representation if people aren't actually able to be on island. So
right, and we have the benefit of having speakers who are not on islands, and it's much easier to have them present via Zoom than it is to have them present by phone. One of the enhancements that was being considered is allowing the chair to attend remotely. Currently, you cannot chair the meeting and while attending remotely, which makes perfect sense if you don't have Zoom, but obviously it's easy to chair a meeting on Zoom. So, Ian, you had a thought?
Well, yes, Mary, since Jen sadly stepped off Concom and we've been unable to twist her arm to get her back, they have changed the protocol slightly. So now you can vote, but it has to be tabulated individually over the phone. So it's a bit of a pain in the neck. So there we have it.
Thank you, Ian. Sarah? And then Gary.
Thank you, Mary. Just to add 2 cents, I think as if we can advocate for meeting this way as much as possible, to echo what Jen said, I think there's more availability of people to participate without concern. I'm personally fine meeting either way, but just in terms of having the largest number of members that can attend and vote, I think I would advocate for as long as we can manage it.
Thank you, Sarah. Gary?
Obviously, for people like me who are only on the island at part-time, it's better to have these meetings. In the past, the way the rules were was that you could participate in a meeting electronically, but if you were participate and you could vote, but if you were participating electronically, your presence did not count for quorum purposes. So as long as there was a quorum in place on island, then you could have one or more members electronically join the meeting, either by telephone or by Zoom. And we're hoping, my committee, we're going to have a meeting this Saturday, but we're hoping that before April 1, the governor, in some way, Massachusetts, extends that, the current permission, because we've been meeting for the last 2 years electronically by Zoom. And if he doesn't extend that quorum exception, then we're not going to be able to have a quorum. We're not going to be able to take any official action. So we're waiting to see what happens before April 1.
Yes, thank you, Gary. And I'll add, I think it's important that these meetings are recorded. So if we were asked to meet live, but in a space which did not offer recording equipment, I would not be in favor of that. Because I think it's wonderful to have these recorded meetings as a resource for the public. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, we have reached the end of our agenda, so we can take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ian. Was that Matt seconding?
That's me, yep.
Okay. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all. We will see you, some of you at the workshop, and the rest in a month on March 22nd.
Thank you, Mary. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay safe, everybody.
Mary, just, do you know when Sarah joined the meeting?
6 minutes after the hour, yes.
Okay. What is the workshop we were talking about on the March the 8th?
Would you like me to stop the recording? Would you like me to stop the recording?
Yes, go ahead, Vince.